Timeless Assassin. By author, Raj_Shah_7152. Chapter 741 to 755. Chapter 741, Rock Bottom. Neutral planet Cyrith, public square broadcast, a common cult citizen's POV. Across the countless neutral worlds scattered through the universe, every major plaza, tavern, and trading hall fell under the same silent spell as the broadcast began. The skies above Cyrith, usually filled with the soft hum of airships and market chatter, went eerily still as the largest hollow screen in the capital square flickered to life, projecting the image that none of the cultists wished to see. Their dragon, their savior, stripped off his basic dignity and forced to stand chained, naked, bleeding. The sound of the crowd from Vorlis roared through the speakers, spilling across cities and marketplaces alike as the ceremonial drums beat like funeral bells. The voices of righteous citizens jeered and cheered, overlapping with the rhythmic crack of the whip that echoed from the transmission. Whiplash, whiplash. With every lash that fell, the people of the cult flinched as if the pain were their own, their eyes wide and hollow, their bodies stiff with disbelief. Inside the crowd, they dared not breathe too loud. For though the neutral planets pretended to be fair, everyone knew which faction held true power here, and to weep for the cult, or even to look too mournful, was to invite imprisonment or death. So they stood still, men, women, and children, cloaked in silence while those around them laughed and pointed, calling the image on the screen a fitting end for the evil dragon of the cult. No one among the cult spoke aloud. They could not. They only watched, each pair of eyes carrying the same quiet ache. A middle-aged man in a brown cloak clutched the hand of his daughter tighter, his knuckles white as her small fingers trembled within his grasp. "Father, why are they hurting him?" she whispered softly, her voice barely audible against the background laughter. He could not answer. His throat felt locked, his heart heavy as the words choked inside him. Beside them, an old woman stood with both hands pressed to her mouth, tears rolling freely down her wrinkled face as the soldiers on-screen raised the whip again, striking there until the blood sprayed against the platform. Whiplash, whiplash, whiplash. And yet through it all, the dragon did not bow. Even through the pixelated shimmer of the projection, his posture remained proud, his head high, his eyes fixed forward. As that quiet strength he projected tore deeper into their hearts than any wound could. Because they knew what it meant. It meant that even now, after being broken, stripped, and shamed, he refused to kneel. And if he would not kneel, then they too could not kneel. But courage was a luxury none of them could afford. A young man standing by the corner of the square clenched his jaw until blood seeped from the side of his mouth, the rage in his chest screaming for release. Yet when one of the righteous citizens turned toward him and laughed, he forced a hollow smile in return, pretending to share in their amusement as bile rose in his throat. All across the planet, the same scene repeated. In every alleyway, every dim bar, every crowded street where the broadcast played, cult survivors watched their pride unravel in real time, yet not one dared to show it. They lowered their heads, or looked away, or bit their tongues until they bled, their hearts burning in silence while the rest of the universe rejoiced in their despair. Is this what we've become? Are we truly so powerless now? The questions echoed in the hearts of millions, unspoken but shared, like a collective prayer swallowed before it could reach Soren's ears. Some knelt right there in the mud, pressing their foreheads to the ground, whispering Ver's name beneath their breath, hoping that somehow their faith could reach him across the void. Some could not bear to watch and turned their backs, the sound of the whip haunting them as they walked away, pretending to be indifferent while tears rolled down their cheeks. And some simply stood frozen, faces pale, eyes hollow, watching the man who once embodied their hope now treated as an animal before the entire universe. For them, this was worse than exile. When their home worlds were conquered, they had endured. When their cities burned, they had endured. But now, watching their dragon humiliated while they could do nothing but stand among the mockers and pretend to laugh with them, this was the moment they knew they had reached the true bottom. And yet, amidst the despair, something small but unyielding stirred within the crowd. A whisper, barely audible, a single trembling voice that said, "He's still standing." Then another, "He didn't bow." And soon, from corners of the square, hidden beneath the noise of laughter, came faint murmurs of quiet defiance. He didn't break. He's still the dragon. He's still ours. None of them dared raise their voices higher than a whisper, but those whispers spread like ripples through the crowd, carried by hearts that still refused to die. Because though their bodies were slaves to fear, their faith was not. Even humiliated, even chained, their dragon still stood, and that alone was enough to remind them that the cult of ascension had not truly fallen. Not yet. And hence, even as the broadcast continued, as the crowd of righteous citizens howled with laughter and hurled insults at the screen, the cultists among them only lowered their heads further, hiding faint smiles behind trembling hands. For though the universe saw a broken man, they saw a promise unspoken. A vow that one day, when the time came, every lash and every humiliation would be repaid in full. A small group of cultists gathered in secret that night, their faces hidden beneath worn hoods, their voices hushed as they argued in desperation. "We must save the dragon," one man said, his tone cracking as he slammed his palm against the table. "I can't take it anymore. Every day they humiliate him, every hour they show new clips of his suffering. Even if I die, I need to try. I need to save our Lord." "I understand how you feel," another replied quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor, "but trying to save him now would be suicide. Do you not realize what guards him? He travels with 200 transcendent tier soldiers and 4 monarchs. Even if we gathered every cultist on this planet, we would not reach the steps of his cage before being slaughtered." "But what then?" the first man shouted, his voice trembling. "Do we just sit here and do nothing while our Lord is whipped in front of the universe? Are we really so helpless?" "It's the truth," an older man said at last, his tone low and bitter. "We are powerless. We have no leader, no army, no sanctuary left to flee to. The righteous faction has stripped us of everything." Silence followed, the kind that pressed on the chest and made breathing difficult. A young woman broke it after a moment, whispering softly, Maybe all we can do now is pray. If we cannot save him, then at least let our prayers reach him. Let him know that his people still believe." The others lowered their heads, her words sinking deeper than they wished to admit. "Pray," the older man repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes. For now, that is all we can do." No one spoke after that. For in their hearts, each of them already knew that no prayer could pierce the walls of his prison, yet still they prayed, because it was the only thing left that made them feel hopeful. Chapter 742, Ver meets Caliph. For 60 relentless days, Ver was paraded across more than 100 righteous faction worlds, dragged through their capital streets like a captured beast, while crowds lined up to spit, curse, and hurl whatever they could find at his broken body. From the shimmering towers of Voralis to the ash-covered slums of Meraxis, the story was always the same. A chained dragon displayed as a trophy, a fallen messiah mocked by those who once trembled at his name. By the end of the 60th day, when even the novelty of his humiliation began to fade, the righteous faction announced something far darker than any parade. Exactly 60 days from now, the message declared, its words echoing across hollow screens and transmission towers from one end of the universe to the other, the execution of the evil dragon, Aegon Ver, will take place within the pit, sacred home of the great god Helmuth. His death shall be witnessed by all, broadcast live across every world under heaven, marking the final end of the era in which the evil cult and its people terrorized the universe. The announcement was repeated endlessly by every media channel and Galaxy Net posts, until even those who were far disconnected from civilization received the message. And until then, it was decided that he would be held securely in an undisclosed location, so that the cult supporters could not come and save him even if they tried. The Eternal Garden, Ver's POV. To his extreme surprise, at the end of his humiliation tour, instead of being returned to another foul dungeon, the righteous soldiers escorted him into what could only be described as the recreation of heaven itself. The Eternal Garden stretched endlessly before his weary eyes, bathed in a golden mist that shimmered faintly beneath a sky of silver light. The air was thick with fragrance, not of incense or perfume, but of something older and purer, of rain, of spring, of life untainted. Gentle ocean winds drifted in from the nearby cliffs, carrying the soft rhythm of waves brushing against stone, their sound calm and soothing, as if the sea itself whispered lullabies to the land. The ground beneath his feet was warm and smooth, covered in flowers that gleamed in the hues of gold and silver, their petals glowing faintly with mana so dense that it seemed to breathe. He had seen the grand halls of the cult and the mansions of rich merchants, but nothing compared to this place. Every leaf here glistened with morning dew that never dried, every gust of wind hummed with dense mana, and even the sunlight felt alive, cascading through the translucent branches of the world trees like ribbons of divine silk. For a moment, Ver almost forgot that he was a prisoner. Then the air shifted. It did not grow heavier, nor did it tremble. It simply changed, as if all of creation had paused to bow before a single presence. And then he saw him. Caliph, the eternal sovereign, emerging from a veil of golden light at the far edge of the garden, his steps soundless, his gaze steady, his existence itself too refined to belong to any plane Ver had known. He was dressed in garments woven from special threads that bent light itself around them, yet the first thing that caught Ver's attention was not the dignity of the god, but the silence that surrounded him, the kind of silence that demanded reverence without effort. In that instant, the fog of sedatives that had dulled his mind for weeks began to burn away. His pulse quickened, his limbs grew light, his senses sharpened until every sound, scent, and shimmer of light returned with unnatural clarity. It felt as though the god's mere presence had restored his consciousness to its full strength, and with it, returned his desire to fight back. "Do not bother trying to attack me, child," Caliph said, his voice soft and melodic, yet carrying the weight of galaxies. "It would be of no use." Ver's eyes narrowed, his instinct screaming to fight, but his reason reminding him of the futility of such an action. For even without Caliph radiating any hostility, he could feel that if the eternal sovereign so much as breathed differently, he would be crushed into dust. Hence, after a long pause, he exhaled and lowered his head slightly, not in reverence but in acceptance. "I suppose it would," he muttered. There was not a single trace of malice radiating from Caliph's body. His aura, calm yet absolute, did not press down on Ver at all, for he did not see him as an opponent, merely as something too insignificant to warrant suppression. "Can I at least have some clothes?" Ver asked finally, his voice rough but composed, his eyes unwavering. Caliph tilted his head, then flicked his fingers gently. The air shimmered. In an instant, Ver's body was cleansed of grime and blood, the stench of pain washed away as fresh robes of deep crimson and silver thread materialized around him, draping his figure with the dignity of a prince rather than a prisoner. His wounds closed, his skin healed, and for the first time in many months, he felt his breath come freely again. He looked down at himself in disbelief, then back at Caliph, whose expression remained unreadable. "I apologize for the inhumane treatment you have endured," the god said quietly, his gaze distant, as though the cruelty of mortals no longer interested him. "It is not my style to humiliate those who have already fallen. But Morris, he finds such degradation amusing. It pleases his ego." Ver gave a short, humorless laugh, the sound sharp and bitter in the tranquil air. "How noble of you to distance yourself from it," he said, his tone dripping with restrained contempt. "A pity that nobility did not stop you from murdering your father." The words hung between them like poison in perfume. Caliph's eyes flickered briefly, not with anger, but with something colder, something dangerously unreadable, before returning to calm. The sound of the sea filled the silence once more, gentle and unending, as the god and the fallen dragon stood face to face beneath the tranquil sky of the eternal garden. Chapter 743, Caliph's Anger. The Eternal Garden, Ver's POV. For a long while, neither Ver nor Caliph spoke. The wind moved between them in soft spirals, carrying the salt of the distant sea and the faint rustle of the golden leaves, yet even nature seemed to hesitate in the shadow of the two standing within the garden's heart. Caliph's gaze lingered on Ver in silence, not as a captor studying a prisoner, but as something far colder, like a sculptor examining a cracked statue, unsure whether to repair it or let it shatter completely. Ver could feel it, that unsettling stillness behind the great god's eyes. There was no hatred, no pity, not even interest, only an unnerving curiosity, the kind that made him wonder whether Caliph saw him as a man at all, or merely a toy to amuse himself with. When the god finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that it almost blended with the sea. "Tell me, child," Caliph said, his tone calm yet heavy with something that made Ver's spine stiffen, "how is my brother faring within the cult?" Ver's fingers tightened around the edge of his robe, the question slicing through the fragile calm between them. He lifted his eyes slowly, meeting Caliph's gaze, the reflection of the garden's golden light flickering across his pupils like embers stirring back to life. He could not believe that Caliph had the nerve to ask him about Soren's health. Not after the betrayal he crafted 2 millennia ago. Sigh. Caliph sighed deeply, as if he had already read Ver's mind before the dragon even uttered a word. However, instead of being defensive about his question, he simply shrugged like he did not care, as he said, "Tell me if you want, or don't. It's not like I'll beg you for it or force you to cooperate. It's completely your decision. I asked you the question, because unlike what you think, I do genuinely care about my brother's health, and that of the cult," Caliph said, as Ver began to laugh out loud at his words. Ha ha ha. You care about Soren. You care about the cult. Ver's laughter echoed through the garden, harsh and disbelieving, breaking the serenity of the divine air. "Please," he mocked, as he lifted a trembling hand to his face, half in disbelief, half to hide the twisted grin that stretched across it. "It's like claiming that the butcher cares for the animal he chops apart every day." "What a joke," he said, his voice dripping with venom as his shoulders shook with derisive laughter. The leader of the righteous faction, the founder of the anti-cult alliance, and the man who tried to murder his own brother claims to care about them. How utterly pathetic. The corners of Caliph's lips curved faintly, though his eyes remained still, unreadable. "Yes," he said softly. "Yes, I do." Ver's laughter faltered. Caliph took a slow step forward, his voice calm yet impossibly steady, like an old truth that refused to bend. "Just because your small mortal brain cannot comprehend it does not make it untrue. My relationship with Soren and the cult is complicated. But in my own way, I care for them both far more than you ever could." The sincerity in his tone struck Ver harder than any blade could have. It silenced him, not with fear, but with disbelief. For the first time since this encounter began, the dragon found no immediate words to mock him with. "What do you mean?" he asked at last, his tone cautious, measured, as if unsure whether to expect a sermon or a confession. Caliph turned slightly, glancing toward the horizon where the golden mist met the endless sea. "Walk with me," he said simply. Without waiting for an answer, the god began down the marble path that wove between the radiant flora, his pace neither fast nor slow, but precise, like a rhythm the world itself was forced to follow. Ver hesitated, then followed, the faint chime of his silver robes echoing behind him. "I have never shared my side of the story with a mortal before," Caliph said as they walked, his voice deep and steady, carrying across the garden like the sound of the tide. "But today, I will humor you. Try to make of it what you will." Ver said nothing. He simply walked beside him, watching as the light of the eternal garden flickered faintly in Caliph's reflection. "Tell me, dragon," Caliph began, his tone lowering, his eyes fixed ahead, "have you ever had something promised to you since birth? Something you trained your entire life for? Something you were told was your destiny, only for it to be snatched away without warning?" Ver frowned, unsure where the conversation was heading. "What are you talking about?" Caliph stopped walking. His gaze turned upward toward the sky, and for the first time, Ver saw something crack in that perfect divine composure. "I was the firstborn son," Caliph said slowly. "The man destined to become the next sect master of the cult of ascension. I was Father's right hand, the one who conquered 108 planets in his name, the heir everyone looked to." His tone hardened with each word, as though the memories themselves had teeth. "My entire life was a lesson in restraint. I was taught to behave, to speak with grace, to hide my emotions, to never act on impulse. I was raised to be the perfect successor. a symbol of discipline and strength. He turned his head slightly, the light from the golden trees catching the edge of his sharp profile. Yet while I was forced to live by these rules, my brother was not. Soren did as he pleased. He fought when he wished, retreated when he wished, lived among the commoners, slept among them, drank with them, laughed with them, and father never once scolded him for it. Because Soren, you see, was never meant to be sect master. Ver's eyes narrowed, already sensing the shape of Kaleth's bitterness. And yet he became it. Kaleth continued, his lips pressing into a thin line, as his anger flared. Dim. Tremble. The sky above dimmed and the ground beneath him began to tremble as Kaleth spoke again, his voice lower, his tone icy and vengeful. The day father declared Soren as his successor was the day the stars went dark for me. I had fought wars in his name. I had buried friends, sacrificed centuries of my life for the future of the cult. And in the end, all of it was taken from me because Kaleth's composure broke, his tone cracking for the first time, because he felt more. Because father claimed that Soren carried the spirit of the people better than I did. The air around them trembled faintly, rippling through the divine mist. The tranquil scent of the flowers began to fade, replaced by the faint tang of ozone. I was told to smile, Kaleth continued bitterly. To step aside with grace, to bless my younger brother as he took everything I had lived for. Father said I was too rigid, too cold, that I reminded him too much of himself, and that the cult needed someone better to govern it now. Someone more humane. Yet, he was the one who made me this way. Kaleth said, as the veins on his neck began to pop out in fury. Over 2,400 years had passed since he had this conversation with his father, yet it somehow still rang fresh in his mind, even to this day. Chapter 744, Flashback. 2,400 years ago, Planet Ixtal, Kaleth's POV. Kaleth rushed through the lost forest with the speed of a storm, his footsteps gliding across the moss-laden earth as leaves and dust whirled in his wake, while the faint glow of bioluminescent vines painted fleeting trails of light behind him. The scent of rain still lingered in the air, heavy and metallic, yet he paid it no mind, for his father's summons had been absolute. When the timeless assassin called, one did not linger. As of yesterday, he had achieved what none before him had. The 108th successful conquest in the name of the cult, a number that finally surpassed his father's long-standing record of 107. The feat had been proclaimed across the conquered systems as the dawn of a new era, as elders and soldiers alike whispered that Kaleth, the Conqueror Prince, would soon ascend as the next sect master of the Cult of Ascension. However, the tone of the message that summoned him home carried none of that joy. It carried gravity, and beneath it, an unease he could not name. Soon, the stone castle of Ixtal came into view as he crossed the final ridge, its dull spires rising from the mist like a fantasy castle. Kaleth entered without pause, his cloak trailing through the windless hallways as he strode toward the inner chamber. The familiar hum of divine mana echoed all around, deep and resonant, as if the castle itself breathed in tune with the will of its master. When he reached the grand hall, he dropped to one knee without hesitation. "Father, you called for me." The timeless assassin stood by the great window that overlooked the lost forest, his robe still dark as the void, his hair streaked faintly with silver, his presence vast enough to quiet the air itself. Yet when he turned, there was no victory in his expression. His gaze was calm, but something within it trembled between pride and guilt. "Yes, my son," he said slowly. "There is something I wish to speak to you about." Kaleth straightened, confusion flickering across his otherwise composed face. The timeless assassin's tone dropped lower, carrying the weight of silent accusation. "During your last conquest," he said, "did you kill the 5-year-old mortal son of Helmuth the Berserker? I have heard whispers that you personally crushed his skull with your palms." Kaleth's jaw tightened for a brief second, but his eyes remained unwavering as he raised his head. "Yes, father. I did." The boy drew a blade on me. His age, his weakness, his tears, none of it mattered. What mattered was his intent. He bore hatred toward the cult, and hatred breeds danger. I eliminated a threat before it could grow. My actions were logical and clean. Just as you taught me. Silence followed, sharp and suffocating, as the faint crackle of the torches filled the void between them. The timeless assassin's eyes dimmed with a sadness he did not voice, as he reached out with his senses, scanning his son's aura, searching for even a flicker of doubt or regret. Only to find none, as there was nothing around him but calm resolve. Sigh. He sighed deeply, as though the sound itself carried the exhaustion of centuries. For in that moment, he saw not his son, but his reflection, a mirror of his own ruthless youth, carved too precisely in his own image. "You look disappointed, father," Caliph said, his tone low yet sharp. "Why?" The timeless assassin turned away, unable to meet his son's gaze. "Because you remind me too much of what I used to be," he answered softly. "You are everything I once was, disciplined, cold, absolute. You are the son I molded from my own shadow. But perhaps, I have made a mistake. Perhaps I should have strived to make you better than me. More merciful. More human. A ruler that the people could love, not just obey." Caliph felt something twist in his chest, a pain that was not quite anger but close to it. "You did your best, father," he said, his voice trembling only slightly. "If I am your reflection, then I count that as my highest honor. Even if I only ever become half as great as you, that would be enough." The timeless assassin turned back toward him, and for the briefest moment, a single transparent tear escaped his left eye, tracing a faint line down his cheek before vanishing into light. "I am sorry, my child," he said. "For what I made of you. For what I took from you. I was wrong to think that absolute power was the only path to true strength. But there is still time for you to grow beyond me. You can still be better than I was." His words carried a faint tremor, but when he straightened, his divine poise returned, the air around him stilling once more. "In the upcoming sect master ceremony," he continued, "I will appoint Soren as the next sect master." The words hit Caliph like the swing of a blade through armor. For a heartbeat, he thought he had misheard. "What did you say?" The timeless assassin's expression did not waver. "Let Soren bear the burden of leadership for once. Let him contribute to this family in a meaningful way. He is kind. He is gentle. Perhaps, he can be a better leader for this cult than either of us. And more importantly, with him taking over the cult, you can finally be free from the responsibilities I pressed down on you since birth. You can finally be free from my cruelty. Free from my scrutiny. Free from my obsession for perfection. And then, perhaps, you can still grow to be better than me." Caliph blinked slowly, as the meaning of those words sank into him like poison. His breath grew shallow, his pulse thrummed in his temples, as golden threads of fate shimmered faintly around him, weaving a destiny he could no longer control. "Father," he began, his tone dangerously calm, "you built this empire through conquest. You built me for conquest. You made me your blade, your heir, your chosen successor. And now, you hand it to him." The timeless assassin remained silent, his silence speaking louder than any argument. Caliph's hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms until blood dripped onto the floor. His composure fractured, the faintest tremor running through his shoulders as his voice lowered into something bitter and trembling. "All my life, I did what you asked. I killed when you ordered it. I conquered the worlds you pointed at. I buried my mercy because you told me it was weakness. And now you tell me I was wrong for listening." The timeless assassin closed his eyes. "Perhaps you were." The words crushed him more than any blade could. The torches flickered, their crimson flames turning pale, while the air grew tense with the scent of iron. Outside, thunder rolled across Ixtal's horizon as Caliph stood motionless, his entire world collapsing in silence. That was the day his purpose died. And in its ashes, something far darker was born. The sky above the fortress dimmed as if the heavens themselves understood what had just been set in motion. For that was the day Caliph, the eldest son of the timeless assassin, began to dream not of conquest, but of betrayal. Chapter 745, The True Great Betrayer. Present day, the eternal garden, Ver's POV. "Yet he was the one who made me this way." As Caliph's words trailed into silence, his usual composure began to fracture, the calm mask of divinity slipping as faint lines creased his forehead and his jaw tightened. His teeth ground together audibly, the faint glimmer of rage flickering beneath his serene expression. "I do not despise the cult," he said at last, his voice low but trembling with contained emotion. "I never did. If anything, I once loved it more than anyone ever could. After all, I was raised to lead it, to guide it into an age of peace and prosperity beyond the reach of chaos or greed." He paused, his gaze turning distant as the silver mist around them stirred faintly, bending to his mood. "So no, young dragon, when you assume that I feel nothing for it, you are mistaken. For in truth, it pains me to watch the very worlds I conquered fall into ruin, to see the legacy I built for my father's dream now twisted by Morris and his vile men." Ver's eyes widened, his breath catching slightly as he took a half-step forward. He had never heard this side of the story before, no one in the cult had. The history they knew painted Caliph as the betrayer, the god who turned his blade upon his own blood. Yet standing here now, hearing the bitterness laced beneath the calm of his voice, Ver felt the first tremor of doubt. "And as for Soren," Caliph said softly, his tone shifting into something that almost resembled warmth, "he remains my beloved brother, the only kin I have ever truly cherished besides our father, for the universe bears witness to the fact that I practically raised him myself. When my father was too busy governing the cult, it was I who spent countless hours correcting his stance, refining his technique, shaping his instincts until he could stand proud on any battlefield." His gaze turned distant, the faintest trace of nostalgia slipping through his voice. "It was I who guided him past the same pitfalls that once hindered me, who shared every secret I had learned through pain and conquest. And because of that, his foundation surpassed mine, his potential unchained, his strength rising until he became second only to our father himself." Caliph drew a slow breath, the faintest shimmer of melancholy crossing his eyes. "So when I ask how he fares, I am not lying, dragon. I do care deeply, not just for what he has become, but for how much longer he has left to live." Caliph expressed, as Ver faltered, his initial anger suppressed as he began to treat this conversation more rationally. "To be honest, I don't know how he is faring. The only time I've seen Lord Soren in person is when he attended the fight between myself and Leo to be appointed as dragon, and back then, he looked fine to me. So if he's not, it's not something I know of," Ver said, as he cautiously spoke the truth without revealing too much information about the cult, as Caliph nodded in agreement. "I suppose you won't know how he's truly faring, after all, he wasn't the kind to show his weakness to others. Perhaps the only one who knew about his health was Charles, and he's dead now." Caliph spoke without emotion, as Ver's pupils constricted at the mention of Charles, the monarch's death reminding him of the fact that it was Caliph's son Raymond who killed the cult's vice sect master. "You almost had me convinced there," Ver said at last, his voice quiet but trembling with restrained fury. "Almost." He took a slow step forward, his shadow falling across the divine marble beneath them, his expression hardening as his tone deepened. "However, I forgot about the fact that it was your son who killed Charles, and nobody else. You stand here now, acting as if you have no part in the cult's fall, as if your hands are clean. But the truth is far uglier, isn't it?" His eyes sharpened, burning with unrestrained anger. "You are the reason the cult suffers as it does. You are the one who dragged it into these dark times." Caliph turned toward him, the faint light of the eternal garden reflecting across his face as his eyes gleamed with divine arrogance. When he spoke, his tone was neither apologetic nor defensive, but rather proud. "You're damn right I am." The words struck like thunder, freezing the air between them. Ver's heart skipped a beat, his breath caught in disbelief at the sheer brazenness of the confession. Caliph's gaze bore into him, calm yet blazing with the weight of conviction. "I did not lie when I said I care for the cult and for Soren. But that does not mean I deny my part in its fall. I am its destroyer as much as I was once its protector." He took a step forward, the garden's golden light rippling around his feet as his tone sharpened, rich with power and old resentment. "When my father denied me my birthright, when he stripped from me everything I was raised to become, I made a promise to myself. That if the cult could not be mine to rule, then it would belong to no one. And from that very day, I began to plan its end." Calith's expression darkened, his divine composure unraveling as the sea behind them began to churn. For 200 years, I plotted. I forged pacts with the slimy snake Morris. I shook hands with the brute Helmuth. I gathered the 6 great clans beneath one single cause, to bring down my father and end the age of the timeless assassin. Lightning shimmered faintly through the silver mist, as if the eternal garden itself recoiled from the truth being spoken aloud. I orchestrated the great betrayal, Calith declared, his voice deep and commanding. I united the remaining gods under one banner, and together, we struck down the greatest warrior the universe had ever known. It was I who ended his reign, I who claimed his daggers, and I who carved a new order from the ruins he left behind. His eyes burned brighter, his aura flaring until even the petals of the divine flowers bent away from him. After the great betrayal, I conquered once more, not for the cult, not for father, but for myself. I became the architect of the righteous alliance. I forged the universe anew. And now, after all these years, I have even erased the final embers of the cult's defiance from existence. Calith's voice rose, resonant and absolute, the words cutting through the air like divine judgment. I may not be the strongest god, nor the most cunning, nor the most loved, but I am the one closest to my father, the one who he raised to be just like him. His blood flows through me. His will still echoes in my veins. And even though I'm not as good a warrior as him, I still have his mindset unlike any other. The ancient prophecy says that the timeless assassin will walk between the seconds once more. But I believe he already does. For after my father, I am the new timeless assassin. The last word reverberated through the garden, as the sky dimmed and the ocean trembled in response to his outrageous claim. Ver stood frozen in place, his breath shallow, his body cold. For in that moment, Calith looked neither guilty nor remorseful. He looked divine, righteous, and terrifyingly certain that he was right. As it was at this moment that Ver finally realized that it wasn't his father's memory that Calith truly worshipped, but rather the reflection that stared back at him every time he looked in the mirror. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 746, Tapes Delivered. Meanwhile, Planet Granada, Morris's POV. Drip, drip, drip. The sound of rain hitting the endless ocean filled the silence like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, while somewhere far below, the sea groaned and shifted as if even it dared not speak too loudly in the presence of the being seated above it. Morris sat upon the only rock at the ocean's heart, motionless save for the faint curl of his lips, his bare chest gleaming faintly under the stormlight as his long black hair floated above his head. Before him knelt a man dressed in the standard military uniform of the righteous faction, his forehead pressed to the wet stone, his entire body trembling from the sheer weight of the god's gaze. "Are you sure," Morris asked softly, his tone almost playful, "that it was the most magnificent city you have ever seen?" The commander swallowed, his breath shallow as he dared not raise his eyes. "Why yes, my lord. It was indeed the most magnificent city I've ever seen," he stammered. "I flew there myself, just as you commanded, and released the videotapes across the upper districts before their patrols could intercept us. The cult's defense systems locked onto our fleet immediately. I barely made it out alive. I was inside the only ship that survived out of the 1,000 you sent inside." Morris tilted his head slightly, his eyes glinting through the curtain of rain as he studied the man's shaking frame. "But what lay before us," the commander continued, his voice faltering as though the memory itself unnerved him, "was not the wasteland we expected. It wasn't filled with tainted, half-demonic humans or ruins scorched by corruption. Instead, it was alive. A metropolis so vast, so advanced, that even our strongest colonies pale in comparison. The cult, my lord, they're thriving." For a moment, silence returned, so heavy that even the rain seemed to pause between its drops. Then came a sound. A low, guttural chuckle. Morris's shoulders trembled ever so slightly, his head dipping forward as his laughter echoed faintly across the endless horizon. "Thriving, you say?" he murmured, running a hand through his soaked hair while the faintest smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. That's quite the report. His fingers flexed slowly, water streaming down his palm as if tracing invisible veins of power. Well, he whispered, his eyes glimmering with a madness too calm to be ordinary. That makes it all the more interesting, doesn't it? He rose from the rock with unhurried grace, the water rippling beneath his bare feet as if bowing to him. The commander dared to lift his head just enough to see the god's smile, and instantly regretted it. For what he saw in that smile was not amusement, nor wrath, but a sick fascination, like the delight of a predator that had just found a new prey worth chasing. Morris looked toward the distant clouds, where lightning forked through the storm like veins of silver fire, and said in a tone that sounded almost like reverence, "A thriving cult means a beating heart still remains of that wretched organization, and hearts, my dear commander, are so very enjoyable to shatter." He began to laugh again, quietly at first, then louder, until his laughter bled into the sound of thunder rolling across the sea. Crack, kaboom! The storm roared with him, as though the heavens themselves could not decide whether to echo or flee, as for a good 2 minutes, Morris indulged in his own fantasies. My lord, if I may." The commander stammered, his voice thin as thread as he forced himself to rise, palms pressed to the slick rock as he steadied himself against Morris's gaze. "Yes, go on," Morris replied, amusement curling in the quiet of his tone. "My lord, I suggest we place an ambush outside the entrance to the time-stilled world and lock the cult terrorists in there forever. If we ensure they cannot leave, then it will not matter what they do inside. They will be cut off, isolated, and become idle threats we never have to worry about. I say we deploy 1,000,000 ships outside that entrance, and just ensure that the cultists can never hope to come out." The commander suggested in a meek tone. As for a heartbeat, Morris only watched, his eyes like cold lanterns, as he seriously contemplated the proposal. Wag. However, after thinking about it for a while, he began to slowly wag his finger, a soft chuckle unraveling from him as if the very idea tickled some pleasant part of his cruelty. "No," he said, tasting the syllable with a mildness that made it more dangerous than a shout, "where is the fun in that?" He bit the tip of his finger, a red bead forming, and watched it drip back into the storm, delight making his smile thin. "What we need is spectacle. We need them to believe they have a chance, to taste hope and to smell victory, so that when they move we can watch them run into the perfect trap I have set for them. Ambushing their doorstep is clever, it is tidy, it is cowardly. But what I truly want is for them to come out roaring, to gather their banners, to gather their old god, and to come charging in to save their dragon." Gulp. The commander swallowed nervously, the idea settling in like ice, as Morris continued. "The date for the dragon's execution is fixed, and with you successfully dropping those tapes within their sanctuary, I'm sure they will come. When they see the devastating image of their messiah dragged through filth and being humiliated 1,000 times, they will lose their cool, and their stupid urge for revenge will get the best of them. And soon enough, they will pour out of the sewer-like world they hide in, like the rats they are, and jump straight into the trap I have set for their annihilation," Morris claimed, as he began to laugh once more, this time even more maniacally than before. Chapter 747, The Big Green Strikes Again. 24 hours ago, Righteous Fleet Commander Bobby's POV. Bobby did not expect the cult civilization on the other side of the time-stilled portal to be anything special. After all, the time-stilled world had long been dismissed as a dead realm, its mana corrupted, its air unbreathable, its soil blackened beyond repair. He had imagined it as an arid wasteland where only ghosts could linger, a desolate scar of time where nothing truly lived. And hence, when he led his fleet of 1,000 warships through the swirling portal, he expected ruin, silence, and decay. However, what he saw as he entered the veil was something completely different instead. The transition hit like a plunge through molten glass. The world bent and twisted as light and time folded over each other, the sensors screaming in alarm before steadying into clarity, and when the distortion finally cleared, Bobby found himself staring into a horizon that defied every expectation. A modern city that was alive, radiant, and impossibly vast stretched before him. Tall towers made of beautiful shapes rose like divine spires into a sky that looked dull gray and stagnant in comparison. Suspended highways glowed faintly in circular patterns around the central core, and channels of pure mana cut through the landscape like arteries, feeding power to structures that pulsed with life. It was the very opposite of an arid and desolate world, as what laid before them was the best metropolitana that the universe had ever seen. "What, in Lord Morris's name is this?" whispered his second-in-command, eyes wide as the readings flickered wildly across his screen. "There's no tainted mana in our vicinity. No rot. No decay. Commander, this isn't a wasteland. It's a thriving metropolis," Bobby finished softly, his throat dry. He watched the silver spires on the tower tops emit light that mimicked the effect of sunlight in this sunlight-less world, as apparently the cult people had even thought of this aspect to make the life of those living here as normal as possible. "Deploy the tapes," Bobby ordered after a long pause, his tone steady once more. "All squadrons. Scatter them across every major district. The cult heretics need to be shown the downfall of their dragon." "Aye, sir." The command echoed through the fleet as hatches opened and thousands of small metallic capsules descended toward the shining city, burning like comets through the air. For a brief moment, the world seemed calm. Then, boom! A streak of green light erupted from the city's center, cutting straight through the formation. 20 ships vanished in a single instant, their hulls turning to molten debris before the sensors even registered impact. The calm skies erupted in chaos as waves of emerald mana flared upward, forming a radiant dome that fired back at the fleet with unrelenting precision. What was that? Where did that attack come from?" Bobby shouted, gripping the rail as the ship shuddered beneath his feet. "Are they firing back? All units locate the source of the attack and fire back," he ordered, as all around him, more and more ships were cut apart by undetectable mana slashes that cut through the fleet's formation like butter. "Commander, it seems like we can't locate the source of that attack. Our radars don't work in this world." "What now, sir? What are your orders?" the captain cried, his voice breaking through static. But before Bobby could answer, the clouds above the metropolis parted and a shape massive and unnatural rose from within. At first, it looked like a green mist gathering into form, but as it ascended, the mist condensed into something tangible, something alive. A frog. A monstrous, emerald-skinned giant, easily the size of a destroyer-class ship, its golden eyes glinting with intelligence and fury. Its body was sleek and armored in natural carapace, and from its back extended a colossal sword nearly a kilometer long, forged entirely from condensed mana that hummed like a living storm. "Dear God," someone whispered, their voice trembling. It's looking right at us." The frog raised its sword slowly, the air itself vibrating as it gathered power, the blade glowing brighter until its light drowned out the glow of the city spires. Then came the swing. Skrrrrrrhhhhhh. The heavens screamed as a single slash of blinding light tore through the fleet, splitting space itself. Hundreds of ships disintegrated instantly, vaporized by the shockwave as alarms blared and metal screamed. "Evade! Evasive maneuvers! All ships break formation!" Bobby roared, his voice drowned beneath the sound of explosions. "We can't fight this thing. It's too powerful. Retreat, damn it, retreat." The fleet scattered, but it was too late. The creature's second swing cleaved through another formation, its attack cutting through armor like paper. Everywhere Bobby looked, his ships were falling, bursting into silent fireballs that vanished into the shimmering sky. "Commander, we're not going to make it out alive," the captain shouted, gripping the controls. "Punch the coordinates, get us out." Bobby barked, slamming his fist against the console. "Now. FZZZZZZZTTT." The exit portal inched closer into view, flickering erratically as their destroyer ship accelerated towards it. At this point, nobody knew whether they would make it out alive or not. However, in the end, they were the only ship to do so. As out of the 1,000 ships Bobby led into the time-stilled world on this operation, they were the only one to make it back out, while the others were neutralized by the big green monster inside. What the hell was that? What was that urban city? What was that big green monster? Someone aboard the ship whispered those words, their voice trembling, as Bobby swallowed hard, the sound of his own gulp echoing in his ears louder than the explosions that still roared beyond the hull. Though he himself was a monarch and a veteran of countless campaigns, even he felt the chill of death crawl down his spine as he remembered that monstrous frog's gaze. For in those golden eyes, there had been no malice, no hatred, only the calm assurance of power so absolute that resistance itself seemed laughable. And in that moment, Bobby knew, beyond any shadow of pride or denial, that even 10 of him together could not have stood against that single being. That creature was no beast. It was dominion incarnate. And the cult was not dying. It was evolving. Chapter 748, Outrage and Fear. Within the time-stilled world, cult inner territory, Skyshard City, Commoner's Paw. The cult was in chaos. Nobody had expected to see righteous faction warships hovering above the skies of Skyshard City, for such a thing had not happened once in the past 20 years that they had lived within this sealed world. The very appearance of those foreign vessels, their hulls glinting like dark mirrors against the eternal twilight, sent tremors of disbelief through every district, as people rushed out into the streets to witness what none had ever thought possible. And yet, as dreadful as the sight of the enemy's ships had been, the objects they dropped before being destroyed were far worse. Thousands of small metallic capsules streaked down through the sky like falling stars, embedding themselves into plazas, market squares, and residential towers across the city. Curious hands lifted them, fearful eyes gathered around, and soon the first of the recordings began to play, flickering holograms bursting to life before the stunned faces of the cult's people. The scenes that followed shattered the silence. Their dragon, their savior, their symbol of endurance and victory, Aegon Ver, was being paraded naked through the streets of righteous worlds. His body was bloodied, his arms chained, his pride torn apart for the amusement of the righteous crowds that hurled stones and laughter at him. Each clip was worse than the last, each broadcast another knife twisting into the hearts of those who watched. And when the final message appeared on the screen, a formal announcement of his execution 60 outside days from now, the outcry that followed shook the city itself. "How dare they!" cried one woman, tears streaking through the soot on her cheeks. "How dare they treat our dragon like a petty criminal? They'll pay for this," shouted another, clutching a pendant of mana heart against his chest as if drawing strength from it. "They'll pay with their lives." All throughout the city, the air burned with outrage. Commoners shouted and wept in the streets, the markets halted, the prayer halls overflowed, and the night sky filled with the echoes of their fury. Yet beneath the chaos of the people, the soldiers of the cult stood silent. They had watched the same footage, felt the same rage crawl beneath their skin, yet their fury was tempered by something else, fear. For as their minds turned from what the righteous had done to what awaited them now, they all arrived at the same dreadful realization. Someone would have to deliver this recording to Lord Skyshard. And no one wanted to be that person. The barracks fell into uneasy murmurs, the clang of armor faint under the weight of hesitation. Torches flickered against the iron walls as men exchanged anxious glances, each silently praying that command would assign the duty to someone else. "I wonder who's going to be the one to break the news to the Lord," one soldier said, his voice barely above a whisper as he rubbed his trembling hands together for warmth that was not there. "Whoever it is," another replied grimly, "it'll have to be a monarch. Only a monarch could withstand the Lord's presence when he sees something like that, for a weaker soldier will surely faint, or worse, die." The others nodded in agreement, though no one spoke further. The mere thought of standing before the shadow dragon when he was angry was enough to make the bravest among them shiver. Over the last 20 years, every single one of them had fought him at least once. It was a tradition within Skyshard City, a rite of passage for every soldier to face their lord in combat. And it was in those spars that they had all learned the same terrifying truth: the shadow dragon was not human. Even when he handicapped himself, sealing most of his power and limiting his movement, his instincts were so refined and his killing intent so sharp that no one could stand before him without feeling their soul itself recoil. When he walked through the training halls without suppressing his aura, the air seemed to warp around him, and the weaker warriors fainted on sight. For them, he was not just a commander. He was the most powerful being they had ever come across, with just an angry glance of his eyes enough to kill a dozen men. How many winds does the Lord have now? A younger soldier asked hesitantly, his voice quivering as he tried to break the silence. I heard it's over 600,000, another murmured, though his tone was uncertain. 723,000, a veteran corrected, his eyes wide with reverence. As of yesterday, my brother was one of his opponents. He said it was like fighting the universe itself, every strike he made, the Lord had already seen before he moved. The others fell silent, the number alone too immense to comprehend. 723,000 victories without a single defeat. That was the power of their Lord. That was the monster one of them would now have to face, not in battle, but in grief and fury, when the time came to deliver the news of what had happened to the dragon and present him with the cursed recording. The silence in the barracks grew heavier by the minute, thick enough to choke on, as even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. No one met another's eyes. The lamps flickered under the weight of their shared fear, and though none dared to say it aloud, every man knew that whoever carried that tape was already dead. As the tapes continued to play across Skyshard City, casting flickering images of humiliation and chains upon the skyline, every man in that barracks prayed that someone else, anyone else, would be chosen to tell him. For deep within their hearts, they all knew one truth. When Leo Skyshard learned what had been done to Aegon Ver, the universe itself would tremble in response. Capítulo 749, Counting Down. Meanwhile, within the black hole, Soren's POV. The pressure was endless. It pressed down on him from every direction, an invisible ocean of gravity that could crush entire planets into dust, yet Soren sat in the heart of it all, unmoving, his body surrounded by a faint field of protective aura that bent space itself just enough to let him exist. Around him, the abyss churned and screamed. The air, if it could be called that, rippled like molten glass. Fragments of light tore themselves apart before they could reach him, swallowed by the black maw that devoured even the idea of color. And through it all, Soren breathed, slow and steady, his every exhale scattering flecks of condensed metal essence into the storm. The origin metal floated before him, half melted, half solid, a sliver of divine substance capable of rewriting history itself. It pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat, as though it, too, struggled to survive in the gravitational madness that surrounded them both. 95%, Soren murmured, his voice barely more than a thought inside the collapsing silence. Just a little more. He could sense the refinement reaching its threshold, the final layers of metallic bonds dissolving into the void as the origin metal yielded to his will. Each second of progress was paid for with pain that defied description. His mana circuit screamed in protest, his bones hummed like forged steel, and his consciousness trembled between existence and annihilation. Yet, his focus never faltered. He had not come here to die. He had come here to perfect what even other gods feared to touch. 2 weeks. That was how long he calculated it would take before the refinement reached its absolute completion, after which he could finally return. 2 weeks before he could once again set foot in the universe and see what had become of the cult in his absence, and how it was faring after Charles's death. Sigh. He exhaled again, his breath rippling with moldy black spores that betrayed the true condition of his body. Maintaining his full strength for such a long time had taken a heavy toll on his body, with the infection from the origin metal wounds now passing through to his lungs. He had difficulty breathing now, and whenever he exhaled too sharply, black moldy spores made their way out of his mouth, which showed him just how fast he was hollowing from the inside out. Just a little more. I only need to live a little longer, he whispered to himself, the words drifting into the crushing void around him like a vow rather than a plea. He had long abandoned the notion of surviving another century the moment he stepped into this black hole, for he knew the cost of refining the origin metal better than anyone. By pushing his body beyond the edge of reason, he had burned away the years he might have had left, trading them for power that would last only once more, enough for a single, final battle. After that, the cancer that had already begun to consume his organs would finish what the black hole could not, if his opponent's blade did not claim him first. And yet, in the face of that certainty, Soren felt no fear. Only exhilaration. The quiet thrill of a warrior who knew his end was near, and who welcomed it with the serenity of purpose. Very soon, he would leave this place. Very soon, he would stand once again on the battlefield against the men who betrayed his father. And when that day came, he would have a blade capable of killing them in his hands, and a hope to find vindication at last. Within the time-stilled world, Skyshard City, Chaosbringer's POV. The air inside the office was utterly still, save for the faint hum of the mana heart mechanism embedded within the walls, quietly purifying the atmosphere of even the slightest trace of tainted mana. The scent of cold incense lingered in the air, sharp and clean, masking the tension that weighed down the room like lead. Chaosbringer sat behind his desk, fingers laced together, his tired eyes fixed on the 5 monarchs kneeling before him. They were some of the strongest beings in the cult, commanders of vast divisions, leaders who could burn cities and split mountains with a single gesture, yet here they stood, heads bowed, too afraid to even meet the eyes of a mere mortal. The past 20 years had not been kind to Chaosbringer. The lines on his face ran deeper now, and the faint shimmer of youth that once danced in his eyes had dulled into the patient fatigue of a man who had seen too much. His hair, still long and silky, was now tinted with faint streaks of silver, which completely killed any remaining boyish charm that he had, as he now looked like a distinguished gentleman with good hygiene, rather than the once flamboyant hipster that he used to be. Before him stood Su Pei, Darnell Nuna, Dupravel Nuna, Mickey James, and Anderson Silva, 5 monarchs who had taken up the command of various up-and-coming cult divisions. Yet today, it seemed like their battle strength meant little in the face of the task before them. Lord Chaosbringer, Darnell began softly, his usual confident tone replaced by something almost pleading. Please, it has to be you. Apart from his family, the Lord is only mindful of restraining his aura around you. I'm afraid he won't do the same for us. The others nodded wordlessly, each avoiding the other's gaze, ashamed of their own reluctance, as Chaosbringer let out a slow sigh before rubbing his forehead as he leaned back in his chair. The faint light from the projector on his desk flickered against his face, still playing the looping image of Aegon Ver's humiliation in the outside world. He had watched it only once, but that was more than enough. The fury that had crawled up his spine back then still lingered like a poison in his chest. And now they wanted him to show it to Leo. He could already imagine the silence that would follow. The stillness before the storm. The tremor in the air when Leo's aura would finally slip free. And hence, he did not blame them for not wanting to be around for that disaster. Fine, he said at last, his voice calm but heavy. I'll do it myself. None of the monarchs moved. None dared to even thank him. They simply bowed deeper, relief and guilt written across their faces, as Chaosbringer rose from his chair and turned toward the door. A storm was coming. The righteous faction had dared to provoke an already infuriated cult. And a response was sure to follow. Chapter 750, Delivering the Message. Within the time-stilled world, Leo's private mansion, Leo's POV. After his aura had begun to grow unstable nearly a decade ago, Leo had left Skyshard City and moved to a secluded corner of the time-stilled world so as to not be a threat to the civilian population around him. His residence was simple, a single-room dwelling with an adjoining training arena, devoid of attendants, guards, or luxuries. Situated almost 200 miles from the city's edge, his isolation was not born of preference but of necessity. Ever since he began walking the path of the Emperor, his aura had become something the world itself resisted. A moment's lapse in control could shatter glass, crack walls, or extinguish life without intent. And hence only a handful were ever permitted near him, and even they came solely when summoned. The situation had become so worse, that even tainted beasts local to the land that were usually drawn in by the aura of strong opponents, now instinctively avoided him like he was the plague, as even their beastly primal instincts told them to steer clear of the threat that was Leo Skyshard. Hence, as Leo heard an approaching vehicle come towards his mansion and scheduled, he was surprised by the development at first, only to then realize it must be something important, when he heard Chaosbringer walking in his usual stride. Knock, knock. "Come in, Chaosbringer," Leo said in a voice that was calm, low, and commanding, as it carried across the room strongly even though it was spoken barely above a whisper. Chaosbringer froze for a moment at the threshold, his hand still raised mid-air, realizing that Leo had recognized him merely from the sound of his footsteps. "The Lord has made improvements as a warrior yet again," he thought as he took in a deep breath to steady himself, before pushing the door open and stepping inside. Cough. The air in the room was thick, heavy, almost alive with restrained energy, as Chaosbringer involuntarily coughed when he took in the thick air. Leo sat across him, seated upon a throne-like chair carved from black steel and inlaid with silver runes that contained an aura-suppressing enchantment, meant to keep his presence under control. His eyes were covered by a simple blindfold of black silk, tied loosely around his head, while his posture was perfectly still, his hands resting on the armrests, his legs crossed, his aura sealed within the fragile boundary of willpower alone. Chaosbringer had seen him countless times before on battlefields, in annual meetings, even in the aftermath of wars, but tonight, he was different. Tonight he looked regal, sovereign, as the quiet majesty of an emperor radiated from him now, subtle yet absolute, as though the heavens themselves acknowledged his right to rule. His face had not aged a day, and yet it carried the maturity of centuries, the kind of expression that no youth could wear. "Speak," Leo said softly, his voice cutting through the charged silence like the edge of a blade. "My lord," Chaosbringer began, his throat tightening as he felt the faint vibration of suppressed energy prickling across his skin. "There has been a development. I'm afraid you will have to take off your blindfold and see it for yourself." Leo tilted his head slightly. "I could hear the enemy ships entering our atmosphere earlier, but I sensed Dumpy was handling it. I assumed the matter was beneath my attention. Yet since those ships fell, I have sensed anger, strong, collective, almost uncontrollable, rising through the city. It feels as though the blood of every man and woman in Skyshard City burns in unison. But I do not understand why." He turned slightly toward Chaosbringer, though the blindfold still hid his eyes. "Tell me, old friend. What have they done?" Chaosbringer's hands trembled. He took a deep breath, his voice almost breaking as he replied, "My lord, it would be best if you saw it yourself." Leo's fingers brushed against the edge of the blindfold. "Very well." He pulled the cloth free. Yet, the moment his eyes opened, the world reacted. *1. The air warped. The floor vibrated. The faint candlelight flickered wildly, as an invisible force rippled outward like shockwaves on water. Crack. A glass vase near the far wall shattered, the shards turning into fine dust midair. Chaosbringer gasped as his knees buckled under the pressure, his lungs constricting as if an invisible hand had gripped his throat. Choke. He coughed violently, blood flecking his lip as he fell to both knees, the sheer intensity of Leo's aura washing over him in waves of oppressive gravity. Leo sighed, his expression calm but faintly regretful. "I apologize, old friend. Ever since I began to walk this path, my strength has grown faster than my control. Even now, I restrain it as much as I can, yet some of it leaks. And when it leaks, it hurts those I do not wish to harm." He closed his eyes for a moment, the blindfold still clutched loosely in one hand as Chaosbringer shook his head vehemently despite the weight pressing on his body. "No, my lord, to feel your aura is an honor in itself. You owe me no apology," he said as Leo gave a faint smile that was small, fleeting, and solemn. "Stand, then," he commanded quietly, as Chaosbringer obeyed, unsteady but determined, as he stepped forward with the holographic projector held tightly in both hands. "My lord, this recording, it was dropped by the righteous faction's fleet before being annihilated. It contains footage of the dragon, Aegon Vare. He has been captured, and they are using him to provoke us." For a heartbeat, the silence between them deepened. Leo's expression did not change, yet the faint pulse of his aura shifted from calm to dangerous. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, the shadows around the room deepening until the windows themselves began to rattle. Outside, a distant wind began to stir, howling faintly through the mountain pass as though nature itself recoiled. "I see," Leo said finally, his tone so quiet that Chaosbringer almost wished he hadn't spoken at all. He looked down at the device, his hand hovering above it, then turned his gaze back toward Chaosbringer. If it contains such sensitive content, I feel like it will be best if I see it alone, old friend. You do not want to be near me when I open it. Leo suggested, as Chaosbringer bowed low, relief flashing briefly across his weary features. As you command, my lord, he said before turning sharply, as he moved towards the exit with quick but respectful steps. Yet just as he reached the doorway, Leo's voice stopped him once more. Chaosbringer, Leo said, as he froze and turned. Do you have any final requests for me, my lord? He asked softly, as Leo thought for a moment before replying. Send Leonardo to me when you can. Tell him his uncle wishes to speak with him. Leo instructed, as Chaosbringer bowed and nodded deeply. I will do so, at once. He said before leaving the chamber with careful, measured steps, as he closed the massive door behind him. The moment he was outside, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His chest rose and fell as he hurried down the corridor, every instinct screaming for him to put as much distance as possible between himself and the mansion. Ride like the wind, he told the driver of his hovercraft as he climbed aboard. Now, as far from here as possible. The driver glanced at him nervously but did not question the order, as the craft lifted from the ground and shot off into the horizon, slicing through the misty air. Behind them, in that silent mansion upon the cliff, the windows trembled. The wind gathered strength, howling through the valley like the cry of an unseen beast. And within the throne room, Leo sat alone, the holographic tape resting in his palm, its faint blue light reflecting across his face. He waited until he could no longer sense a single living soul within miles of his aura. Only then did he dare pour his aura into the device, as the play button flickered to life. There, my cousin, I told you to come with me. He muttered as he pressed play, the holographic video message flaring to life. Chapter 751, Rage. Within the time-stilled world, Leo's private mansion, Leo's POV. The flickering blue light of the holographic projector painted the walls behind Leo in cold shades of sorrow as he pressed play. TRRRR. A faint hum filled the room, like the heartbeat of a dying star, as the image came to life before him, grainy at first, then sharp enough to draw blood. As there he was, Aegon Vare. His cousin. His brother in all but direct blood. The same boy who once wielded his sword with unshakable pride and carried the future of the cult upon his back, who now stood stripped of all dignity, as he was paraded naked through the streets of the righteous planets in a transparent glass cage. Chains coiled around his wrists and ankles, glowing faintly as suppressive sigils flickered across their surface. His head hung low, but his spine remained unbroken, his silence louder than any plea for mercy could have been. Outside the prison box, a sea of righteous citizens cheered, their faces twisted with contempt and pleasure. They threw stones, rotten fruits, and worse, filth that splattered against the glass with every hateful cry, while laughter echoed through the broadcast like a mockery of the heavens themselves. Leo's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair, as he saw the footage, as the air around him grew denser. They dare parade him naked, he thought, as the veins along his forearms bulged, a faint crimson aura coursing through them, as his killing intent stirred beneath the skin like a caged beast awakening from slumber. Crack! The first fracture appeared on the marble beneath his feet. His jaw clenched, his breathing steady but sharp, as he fought to suppress the storm building within him. Clink! Clang! The sound of chains clinking on the screen only fueled the rage already clawing through his chest. He tried to keep his composure, reminding himself that this was only an image, a recording, yet every second of it felt like reality itself daring him to lose control. There, he whispered, the name heavy on his tongue, as it carried more affection than what he usually allowed himself to show. On the screen, the cage was pulled through the capital's central plaza, the parade stretching on for miles as banners of the righteous faction waved proudly above the jeering crowds. Children pointed and laughed, merchants halted their trades, soldiers threw curses in the name of their gods. And then came the next horror. The cage stopped at the base of a massive platform, a massive concert stage of sorts, flanked by guards wearing the universal government uniform. Tug. The guards then dragged Ver out like he were a beast, as they forced him to the center of the stage, before making him kneel before a whole mob. Snap. Asterisk. At this point, the first lash struck, the sound tearing through the silence of the mansion as Leo's eyes twitched, his aura pulsing once, just once, as the entire room shook. Tremble. The silver runes embedded in his chair flickered weakly as if begging for mercy under the pressure of his power, while dust fell from the ceiling as the walls groaned. The whip fell again, and again, and again, until the number of lashes became meaningless. Each strike sent waves of anger rippling through Leo's veins, his heartbeat echoing like thunder in his skull, while his surroundings began to warp with faint gravitational distortion. The mana in the air crackled audibly now, drawn toward him in uncontrollable streams, as his killing intent began to leak. The glass of the nearby window fractured silently, forming thin spider web lines that spread outward with every breath he took. "How dare they?" he whispered, voice trembling not with weakness but with restraint. He could feel it, his blood boiling, his soul roaring, his entire existence rebelling against what his eyes were forced to witness. To humiliate a prisoner or a criminal was one thing. To humiliate a dignified warrior was another. And to humiliate the messiah of the cult, that was unforgivable. The recording shifted again. The crowd roared. A new figure appeared, an announcer, standing proud at the center of the stage, his voice amplified across the city. "In 60 days' time," the man declared, his tone gleeful, "the cult's fallen dragon, Aegon Ver, shall face his final judgment. His execution will be public, broadcast across the entire universe, as proof that righteousness prevails over corruption. Let the heretics tremble. Let them know the age of the evil cult has ended." Cheers erupted, deafening, disgusting, endless. The moment the word execution left the announcer's lips, something inside Leo broke as the lights in the mansion shattered at once. Bang! A burst of raw aura exploded outward, shattering the chair beneath him as cracks spread across the stone floor like veins of destruction. The furniture around him disintegrated to dust, the air itself seeming to tear apart under the weight of his fury. Tremble. Quake. Outside, the ground quaked, waves of invisible pressure rippling across the cliffside, as they flattened the grass and bent the trees toward the earth as if they were bowing in fear, while the clouds above twisted into a spiral storm, lightning flashing through them as the heavens themselves seemed to respond to his wrath. THRUMM. Leo's eyes burned bright gray, brighter than ever, as the hologram continued to flicker before him, still showing Ver's chained figure, still echoing the laughter of the damned crowd. "I will kill them," he said quietly, each word carrying the weight of divine judgment. "Every single one of them." The words were not shouted, not screamed, they were whispered with such certainty that even the universe seemed to listen. His aura expanded further, uncontrollable now, turning the once calm air into a swirling tempest of oppressive killing intent that made the ground around the mansion tremble like an earthquake unleashed for a full 30 kilometers radius. The protective enchantments constructed around his mansion trembled, the runes along its structure flaring desperately to contain the eruption of force that could have leveled a city. Enough. Leo closed his fist, and the hologram froze mid-frame. The image of Ver, bruised and broken but unbowed, lingered in the flickering light. His eyes, defiant even in pain, met Leo's through the projection, as if across time and space they still recognized one another as Leo felt his rage falter for the briefest heartbeat. Sigh. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension coil back within his chest, though the air continued to tremble around him. "The righteous faction know exactly what they're doing," he muttered, his voice steadier now but still layered with venom. "This was never just an act of cruelty. It's a message." He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing as he studied the paused hologram. "They want us to come for him. They want the cult to break containment, to rush out like enraged beasts. This is bait." For a moment, silence returned, fragile and uneasy as the only sound within the room was that of the broken headlight above. Leo knew trying to save Ver after he had fallen into righteous hands was suicide. Every fiber of logic in his mind screamed for caution, for patience, for restraint. And yet, as he looked again at Ver's image, his cousin's once noble face marred by pain but never surrender, he somehow felt like logic was no longer enough to stop him from attempting a rescue. Even so, Leo whispered, his voice low but unwavering, if there's even the smallest chance that I can reach him, that I can save him. The floor beneath him cracked again as his aura surged for just a heartbeat, fierce and unrelenting. Then I will find it. He let the hologram fade into darkness, his reflection the only thing left upon the screen, cold, calm, and burning with purpose. Chapter 752, An Outrageous Offer. Meanwhile within the Eternal Garden, Ver's POV. After holding a brief conversation with Ver, Caliph retreated to solitude once again, leaving him free to roam the Eternal Garden as he pleased, without placing any restrictions on what he could or could not do. For Ver, it was a strange kind of freedom, one that felt less like mercy and more like an experiment, as if the great god was curious to see what a mortal would do when placed in paradise with no visible leash around his neck. The Eternal Garden stretched endlessly around him, a landscape too divine to belong to mortal imagination. Towering trees shimmered with translucent leaves that refracted light into ribbons of color, while crystal rivers flowed between fields of silver grass that swayed in a breeze that seemed to hum faintly with mana. The air carried the fragrance of blooming fruits and the faint sweetness of creation itself, as though the place had never known decay. Ver wandered for a while, his bare feet brushing through the dew-soaked grass, his senses overwhelmed by beauty. The fruits here hung low and heavy on the tree branches, glowing with the soft light of divinity, and when he reached up to pluck one, it came away in his hand with an almost willing ease. Crunch. As he bit into it, the skin warmed against his lips, and his eyes widened instantly as the taste burst across his tongue, sweet, rich, and overflowing with vitality. It was unlike anything he had ever eaten before, a fruit that didn't just fill the stomach but seemed to feed the soul. He laughed softly under his breath, a sound that startled even him, for it had been so long since he had felt any semblance of joy. Perhaps Caliph was mocking him in his own twisted way, offering him the taste of heaven before sending him back to die in hell. Still, mockery or not, Ver allowed himself to enjoy it. He ate until his hunger faded, then lay back on the grass and closed his eyes, letting the breeze brush against his face as a rare sense of peace began to settle over him. It was fleeting, because peace, as always, never lasted long for him. As soon, a faint shiver crawled down his spine, his sixth sense flaring without warning, as his muscles tensed instinctively and made him roll to the side, his eyes scanning the edge of the divine grove where the light dimmed just slightly. He could feel it now. A presence. Calm, steady, and overwhelmingly powerful, like the quiet before a collapsing star. Impressive, a voice said behind him, smooth and melodic, yet heavy with condescension. Mortals at your level shouldn't be able to sense me. Ver turned sharply, only to see Raymond standing a few feet away framed by the pale golden light filtering through the canopy. His posture was relaxed, his expression faintly amused, as he approached Ver casually. The infamous dragon of the cult, Raymond said, smiling faintly as he extended a hand toward him. It's a pleasure to meet you. Ver looked at the offered hand, then at the man's face, his own expression unreadable. After a long silence, he raised his gaze just slightly, his eyes meeting Raymond's without an ounce of fear. He did not move, his intention clear, as he refused to shake Raymond's hand, no matter what. Ah, so that's how you want to play. Raymond said as his smile widened, a faint chuckle escaping his lips, as he shook his head in disbelief. You cult dragons and your vain pride. He muttered as he retracted his hand, the killing intent around his body suddenly flaring as Ver barely had time to react before the weight of Raymond's aura descended upon him. Thwart. The pressure hit like a collapsing mountain. His knees buckled instantly, his lungs refusing to draw air as the gravity of that divine power crushed him into the ground. His body trembled under the strain as his vision blurred, the dirt beneath him cracking from the sheer force pinning him down. Raymond walked forward slowly, crouching beside him. Don't mistake my courtesy for weakness, mortal, he said softly, the smile never leaving his lips. I don't even need to lift a finger to crush a vermin like you. Ver's vision darkened as the pressure tightened around his neck, his face turning pale, then faintly blue. He clawed at the ground, his fingers digging into the soil as he refused to collapse completely, yet it proved to be futile. Against Raymond's absolute power, he could do nothing, as it was only when Raymond lifted the pressure that he could breathe again, his consciousness slowly returning. Gasp. Cough. Ver fell forward, his palms pressing against the grass as he coughed violently, the taste of blood rising in his throat. Raymond straightened, brushing imaginary dust off his shoulder, his tone suddenly light again as if nothing had happened. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the narrow trail ahead. "Take a walk with your cousin." Ver said nothing, though his glare lingered long enough to make his contempt clear. Still, he followed, more out of curiosity than obedience. The two walked in silence at first, through the winding paths of the garden where glowing petals drifted through the air and tiny creatures watched them from afar. Until finally, Raymond broke the silence. "Tell me, cousin," he began, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp, "did they teach you the cult's secret techniques?" Ver glanced at him, unimpressed. "What if they did? What is it to you?" Raymond chuckled, flicking his fingers idly as a nearby flower uprooted itself and floated gently into his hand. Sniff. He brought it to his nose and inhaled deeply, as though savoring its scent. "It just happens that I wish to learn those techniques from you," he said lightly, his tone carrying the deceptive calm of someone used to getting what they wanted. "If you'd be so kind as to teach them to me, I'll be very grateful," he offered, as Ver snorted softly. "Why don't you ask your father? It's not like I know anything that he doesn't," he replied, as the playful edge vanished from Raymond's face in an instant. It seemed like Ver had struck a chord by this reply, as Raymond clenched his jaw, his eyes darkening, as his voice dropped several degrees colder. "My father," he said quietly, "will not teach me those moves. Nor will he pass down the core knowledge that my grandfather entrusted to him, knowledge of God-slaying formations and time dilation techniques. He fears me, you see. Paranoia runs deep in this family. After killing his own father, he's too cautious to ever trust his son with the same power." Ver blinked at him, half amused, half bewildered, as he looked around the radiant expanse of the eternal garden. "You do realize you're saying all this inside his home, right? Aren't you afraid he's listening?" Raymond smiled faintly and shook his head. "Although I'm not as strong as him, I'm still a demigod. I can't create a domain the size of this one, but I can carve a small pocket of silence he cannot peer into. Right now, we are walking inside it. So speak freely. He won't hear a word." Ver raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "You people are insane," he muttered under his breath. "Family issues at godly scale. How refreshing." Raymond ignored the remark, turning his gaze forward again, his tone growing darker. "I'll get straight to the point then." He stopped walking, his shadow falling long across the luminous grass as he looked at Ver with eyes stripped of all pretense. "Teach me all 15 forbidden techniques of the cult within the next 60 days, he said, his voice calm but firm, "and I'll return the favor by teaching you how to escape the eternal garden undetected." Ver froze. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. Then, as the meaning settled, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Escape," he repeated quietly. Raymond nodded once. "You heard me." Ver stared at him, stunned, the silence between them broken only by the gentle whisper of divine wind brushing through the silver grass. He couldn't tell whether the demigod before him was bluffing, desperate, or simply mad. But as a desperate man with no other path left, he found himself unable to dismiss the offer outright. Chapter 753, A Gesture of Goodwill. Within the eternal garden, Ver's POV. For a long moment, Ver simply stood there, staring at Raymond in utter disbelief, his mind blank as his mouth refused to form words. The proposal that had just left the demigod's lips sounded absurd, unreal even, as though the man were joking or worse, testing him. He blinked once, then twice, trying to piece together what he had just heard, yet the silence that followed only made the air feel heavier. "Can I even trust this man?" he thought, his gaze fixed sharply on Raymond's face. What guarantee do I have that he won't trick me and leave me to rot the moment he's already gotten all that he needs from me? His brows furrowed slightly, suspicion curling through his chest like smoke. Raymond stood there calmly, arms folded behind his back, smiling faintly as if he had just offered Ver the most natural deal in the universe. Does he even know what the cult's secret techniques are? Or can I just bullshit my way through this and feed him nonsense? Ver wondered, his eyes narrowing as he studied the demigod's expression, searching for any flicker of deceit. He raised an eyebrow, still silent, still unwilling to break the stare. Nah, I probably can't fake all of them, he realized, the thought bitter in his mind. He'll notice something's off if I do. But even if I wanted to teach him, I don't even know all 15 forbidden techniques myself. A quiet sigh escaped him, his shoulders lowering slightly as the weight of the situation sank in, until finally, he spoke. What guarantee do I have, he asked slowly, that you won't betray me the moment I give you what you want? It's not like I can trust your word for it. His tone was steady, yet underneath it lay the faint edge of challenge, as though daring Raymond to prove him wrong. And to his pleasant surprise, the demigod did not seem to take offense. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the question with genuine seriousness. A fair point, he said at last. How about I show you a gesture of goodwill to help you trust me better? He suggested, as he lifted the delicate flower still held between his fingers and gently placed it in Ver's hand. This, he said, is the moonshine flower. In case you're unfamiliar, it only grows here in the Eternal Garden. It's quite special, it has 5 petals, each one capable of changing the fate of a monarch. Ver glanced down at the flower. Its petals shimmered faintly under the divine light, glowing with an ethereal hue that shifted between blue and silver. The surface of each petal seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, resonating with an ancient mana far beyond anything found in mortal realms. Raymond smiled faintly as he continued, his tone casual but deliberate. You need just 1 petal of this flower to concoct a demigod potion. So, in theory, a full flower gives you enough material to make 5 such potions, provided, of course, that you can acquire the other rare ingredients required for the brew. Ver's eyes narrowed in confusion as he turned the flower slightly, examining its strange texture between his fingertips. Other ingredients? He asked, his voice low but curious. As listening to that question, Raymond's smile deepened, his tone turning sly. He leaned closer, close enough that Ver could feel the faint warmth of his aura pressing faintly against his skin. Teach me 1 forbidden move, he said quietly, and I'll tell you about them. Ver stared at him, silent once again, as Raymond stepped back, clearly enjoying the moment. Until then, the demigod added, keep that flower close, dragon. Tuck it somewhere safe, inside your robes perhaps. Usually, no one can pluck a moonshine flower from the Eternal Garden without Father knowing, but, he paused briefly, his eyes glinting with mischief. I've found a way around that. He won't notice this one missing. Ver looked down at the flower once more, uncertain whether to be impressed or alarmed. The petals shimmered faintly in his palm, cool to the touch yet radiating a divine warmth deep within. Raymond reached forward and gave his shoulder a light pat, the gesture oddly casual considering the weight of their exchange. Think about it, dragon, he said with a smirk, his tone smooth and confident, as though he already knew what Ver's answer would be. I'll be back for your decision tomorrow. Before Ver could respond, Raymond's form shimmered faintly, his outline distorting into threads of golden light that scattered into the air like fading fireflies. And then he was gone. The silence that followed was deep, broken only by the soft hum of the garden itself, the whisper of divine winds moving through the silver leaves. Ver stood there for a while, still holding the flower, its faint glow reflecting in his eyes as conflicting thoughts swirled within him. Was this a genuine gesture of goodwill, or a well-laid trap? He couldn't tell. The demigod breakthrough potion is extremely important for the future of the cult. If it really can't be brewed without this flower, then it's a priceless treasure that needs to be protected at all costs. He thought as he slipped the moonshine flower carefully into the inner fold of his robes. If there is even a sliver of truth in what he said, then maybe, just maybe, I have a chance to escape this place alive. He thought, as although he had not made his mind on whether or not to trust Raymond just yet, he felt like he should play this game just a little while longer, until he could uncover Raymond's true intentions behind this offer. Sigh. A long sigh left his lips as he looked towards the beautiful sky above, and wondered as to why fate was playing this cruel game with him. And as to what it really wanted. However, no matter how he framed the question, the heavens did not reply, as in the end, he had to make that choice on his own. Chapter 754, Entrusting a Mission. The time-stilled world, Leo's isolated mansion, Leonardo's POV. Leonardo strolled into Leo's mansion without the slightest trace of the hesitation that most men felt when approaching the shadow dragon, for unlike them, who revered Leo with the fear one reserved for gods, he simply loved him as his uncle. Step, step. His boots clicked softly against the marble floor, the sound echoing faintly through the vast silence of the mansion. The air within felt unusually heavy, dense with mana, as faint ripples of restrained power shimmered through the walls like invisible waves, a constant reminder of the being who resided here. No guards stood at the entrance, no servants lingered in the halls. The mansion was vast but lifeless, designed for solitude rather than comfort, with no ornaments, no scent of food or flowers, and no trace of daily human life, only stillness, pure and absolute. Leonardo moved forward calmly, his expression steady, the long earring on his left ear swaying lightly with each step. The earring had become an ornament he wore at all times, a signature of his dressing style, which his father disapproved of. However, he wore anyways, for he felt like it gave him flair and personality. The aura around his body flickered between shades of light and dark blue, showing his jolly mood at being invited to his uncle's mansion, for he knew that his uncle would only call for him if there was an exciting development to share. He looked like a spitting image of his late grandfather Jacob in his youth, sharing the same calm composure, the same black hair, the same piercing eyes, and that same quiet discipline that made his every movement look deliberate, measured, and precise. Ooh, looks like Uncle was in a seriously foul mood before my arrival. Look at all this window and tile destruction. Sheesh. He must have raged hard, he muttered before pushing open the door to Leo's room, as he wondered as to what made his uncle destroy his surroundings so badly. Inside, Leo sat upon his throne-like chair, his figure illuminated by faint motes of light dancing through the air. His eyes were closed, his aura restrained behind a thin veil of calm that seemed more forced than natural. To anyone else, standing before him would have felt like standing before a storm that could erase existence. But Leonardo had grown accustomed to this suffocating pressure over the years, and so he stood tall, head raised in confidence but eyes respectfully lowered. You called for me, Uncle. His voice was even, his tone composed, though faintly laced with the reverence that no member of the Skyshard bloodline could ever entirely conceal. Leo's eyes opened slowly, silver gray and deep as starlit oceans, as he nodded once, studying his nephew in silence for several seconds before speaking. You have improved as a warrior since the last time I saw you, he said, his gaze traveling briefly along the boy's posture, aura, and breathing rhythm. Your internal mana flow is smoother, more stable than before. Leonardo bowed slightly, accepting the compliment with humility. Thank you, Uncle. The last time they had met was 6 months ago, at the funeral of his grandmother, Elena Skyshard. As just thinking about it, Leonardo felt his eyes water up slightly. Elena had passed away in her sleep, peacefully and without pain, though her death had come as a surprise to the entire Skyshard family. Ever since Jacob's death 2 years prior, her loneliness had grown quietly unbearable, and perhaps, Leonardo often thought, she had simply chosen to follow him. Her grave now lay beside Jacob's, beneath the flower bed near their family manor, just as she had always wished. Leo's expression softened for a brief moment at the memory before he spoke again. How has the family been? Leonardo took a careful breath before replying. They miss you, Uncle. Especially Aunt Amanda. She hopes you can come home sometime soon. Caleb's 5th birthday is coming up. At the mention of his wife and children, Leo's composure faltered, if only for an instant. His lips parted slightly, but no words came, as a faint shadow crossed his expression. He had 2 sons, Caleb and Myron. 5 and 3 years old, in the cutest phases of their life. Yet, unfortunately for him, he could not hold them in his hands, or show them any fatherly affection, for his aura was too unstable to be around kids so tender. "I will meet Amanda sometime later this month," Leo said at last, his voice low. "As for the children, give them my love." Leonardo nodded, understanding perfectly. He knew why his uncle kept his distance. Leo's aura, though restrained, was far too volatile now. A single lapse in control could stop a heart, freeze blood, or shatter bones. Being near children whose bodies were still developing was simply too dangerous. The young man clasped his hands behind his back. Despite being barely 22, Leonardo had the poise of someone twice his age, molded by the harshness of this world that had no mercy for the weak. "So why have you called for me, uncle?" he asked gently, breaking the silence that had begun to stretch between them. Leo leaned back slightly, resting a hand against his forehead, his tone contemplative. "Tell me, Leonardo, how is your aura mastery progressing? How many colors have you seen?" Leonardo hesitated before answering. "Still only 2, uncle. Red and blue. I haven't been able to perceive any others yet." Leo nodded knowingly, not the least bit disappointed. That is to be expected. Some colors take years to appear, some require experiences beyond the ordinary to trigger recognition. Do not be discouraged. Keep your eyes open, and when the time comes, the next color will reveal itself naturally. Leonardo nodded silently, his respect for his uncle deepening further with every word. When he first began down the path of aura mastery, he did not feel like it would be so difficult. However, now, as 2 years had already passed and he had already reached the peak of Grandmaster in terms of body, mind and mana mastery, he understood just how tough it must have been for his uncle to complete his manual mastery, for learning aura was far more difficult than mastering even the most difficult of skills. Until he had not walked down that path himself, he could not recognize its difficulty, but now that he had, he knew just how awesome his uncle was to have completed aura mastery and ascend to transcendent before the age of 25. "The reason I called you here today is because I need a favor," Leo said finally, as his tone dropped to one of grave importance. Leonardo straightened instantly, his posture shifting into that of a soldier before his commander. "There is a place," Leo began, his voice echoing faintly in the vast chamber, "that I have been trying to locate for the last 2 decades. A place said to exist somewhere in the middle of the time-stilled ocean. Sailors speak of a floating island there, a piece of land that hovers above the water, invisible to most, and unreachable to those who try to find it." He paused, his eyes distant, his tone almost analytical as he continued. "Whenever I send crafts over that region, they pass through it as if there is nothing there. The sailors, however, claim to see it with their own eyes from below, yet the closer they get, the more it fades until it disappears completely." Leonardo frowned slightly, intrigued despite himself. "An island that disappears the closer you approach it." "Yes," Leo confirmed. "A myth, perhaps. Or something more. I want you to find out which." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming faintly with conviction. "You will take an expedition to that region. If there is anything of value there, you will know it by its aura. A red, blue, or golden hue should appear if the island truly exists. You will observe, confirm, and report back to me through your crystal communicator." Leonardo listened carefully, his hands clasped behind his back as the magnitude of the request settled in. "I will send 2 monarchs with you for protection," Leo added. "You will take no unnecessary risks. This is reconnaissance, not conquest. I simply lack the time to confirm these rumors myself. But if the island is real, if something lies hidden there, it may be of profound importance to us." He paused again, then added quietly, "You are the only other warrior in the cult walking the path of aura. That is why I'm entrusting this mission to you. You will see what others cannot." Leonardo lowered his head briefly, the weight of his uncle's trust pressing upon him like armor. "I understand. I'll do everything in my power to make you proud, uncle." "I know you will," Leo said softly, his voice warmer now, touched by a rare affection. You are your father's son, after all. For a brief moment, silence returned, neither uncomfortable nor cold, but filled with unspoken understanding between them. Leonardo turned to leave, his steps quiet as he approached the exit. But before he reached the door, Leo's voice followed him once more. Leonardo. He stopped and looked back. When you stand upon the sea, Leo said slowly, his tone carrying that same grave wisdom that had once shaped nations, remember that the world often hides its truths behind illusions. Trust your instincts more than your eyes. The instincts of our blood will see more than the eyes of other men. Leonardo bowed deeply. Yes, uncle. And with that, he departed, the faint light of the mansion fading behind him as he stepped back into the cold, endless twilight of the time-stilled world, his heart thumping loudly at being entrusted with his first real adventure. Chapter 755, Doubts. Leo let out a deep sigh once Leonardo left, as the silence of the mansion settled around him once again, heavy and familiar. He could not believe how quickly the boy was growing. It felt like just yesterday when Leonardo used to hide behind Jacob's legs, peeking out nervously with wide eyes whenever Leo returned home from training. He still remembered the way the child would cling to Alina's robes, too shy to greet him alone, and how his laughter used to echo through the manor's courtyard as he played with wooden swords Elena had carved for him. Now that same boy stood tall and proud, carrying the weight of the Skyshard name on his shoulders with the grace of a man twice his age. The realization made Leo's chest tighten faintly, a quiet ache spreading through him as he stared at the faint glow of his own reflection against the polished marble floor. When had the years slipped away so silently? When had the child turned into a warrior? Somewhere between his endless training and his pursuit of strength, time had passed him by without mercy, bleeding into decades until he could no longer recall the exact moment when Leonardo's innocent childlike laughter had become a memory. Sigh. In the end, I'll walk alone, he muttered under his breath, his voice barely louder than the soft hum of energy that filled the air. His mind drifted toward the faces of his parents, Jacob's steady gaze, Alina's warm smile. Both gone, both having left him with nothing but the hollow echo of what once was. They had passed without warning, leaving him standing in the aftermath of their absence, wondering whether all his years of training had been worth the cost of missing those final moments. For a while after he entered the time-stilled world, he had managed to balance it all, strength and family, ambition and affection. During the first 15 years of his stay here, he had visited home often, spending fleeting yet precious days with family every month. He could still recall those dinners that stretched late into the night, filled with laughter, teasing, and gentle scolding from his mother whenever he trained too long. But after Jacob's death, things had changed. Elena had grown quieter, smaller somehow, her joy dulled by solitude, while he himself had become consumed by duty, losing sight of the world outside his endless cycle of discipline. When she passed in her sleep, peacefully yet alone, the guilt had settled into him like a blade twisting slowly through his chest. This strength, he whispered, glancing down at his hands as a faint crimson glow began to shimmer around his fingers, the color shifting like liquid fire. It's more of a curse than a boon. The red aura pulsed faintly, its rhythm uneven, its pressure spilling into the room in waves that made the nearby windows tremble. Leo inhaled slowly, pulling it back under control, though the act took far more effort than he cared to admit. The Emperor Suppression Manual had granted him unimaginable power, but each layer of mastery came at a cost. The stronger his aura became, the more fragile his control over it grew, as though the world itself resisted the energy he carried. He clenched his fists, watching the light flicker and fade. Because of this power, he had lost the right to be near those he loved most. He could not hold his wife's hand without fear of hurting her. He could not cradle his children in his arms without risking their fragile hearts. Every visit to his home was conducted only after the children were moved somewhere safe, or he met Amanda in private, where she came to see him without the kids. It was a cruel irony. He had become strong enough to move entire oceans, yet powerless to touch the faces that gave him reason to live. I'm turning into him, Leo murmured, his voice thick with quiet bitterness. Into the same kind of father Jacob was. A father who was always gone. A father who watched from afar. A father whose love could only ever reach through absence. His gaze drifted toward the far wall, where faint scorch marks still stained the stone from his earlier rage. The memories of Ver's humiliation burned vividly behind his eyelids, feeding the anger he had tried to suppress. Maybe that was the price of carrying too much strength. To love, yet never touch. To protect, yet never hold. To care, yet always stand alone. The red aura flickered again, faint at first, then rising like a living flame that danced across his shoulders before he forced it back down with a strained exhale. The mansion trembled lightly under the suppression, the silence that followed deeper than before. That's why I have to save you, cuz, for in the end, if not for you, I may truly end up without a single friend in this universe, and just thinking about such a life scares me. As much as I envy Soren for his strength, I don't want to live for 2,000 years like he did, confined within the four walls of an old castle, with only an underling to call friend. Leo admitted, as over the past 2 decades, after finally processing the death of 2 loved ones, he realized that his path was inevitably going to end up with him being alone. For unless one of Ver, Leonardo, Caleb or Myron became a god as well, he would be doomed to an eternity of solitude. Surely, at the end of this road, I won't look back at this life and wonder, was it even worth the effort, right? He asked himself, as his eyes dimmed, his voice quiet with sarcasm and fear, as he put on the blindfold over his eyes once more and began walking out towards the training arena. He had already defeated 750,000 opponents without a single defeat, and if he could keep this up without making any mistakes, he could finally complete this stage of the Emperor's suppression manual within the next year or so. With him hoping to save Ver, failure was no longer an option, for he knew he needed all the strength he could spare to even think about attempting that mission. End of Volume 7. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.